Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing really well and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So I thought I'd do a Halloween themed tutorial seeing as it's nearly Halloween. So this is a cat's eye and I've left the reference photo in the description below so you can follow along. I've also listed all the colours that I've used in the bottom left hand section of the video as I progress through the drawing. If you'd like monthly access to tutorials just like these and longer like full in-depth ones, then head over to my Patreon where I've got over a year and a half worth of tutorials to choose from, all coloured pencil animal based tutorials. Please also remember to subscribe to my channel to see more videos like this, and yeah, hope you enjoy this tutorial. So I'm going to make a start then. I've already drawn out the outline and I have very lightly just drawn a little box around the area that I'm going to be drawing. If you want to make the edges really sharp, you can add masking tape to each of the edges. So I'm just going to do that now quickly, kind of line it up with the edges that you've drawn with the ruler. So for this tutorial I'm going to be drawing on extra white hot pressed Fabriano Artistico paper, my usual basically, and I'm going to be using a mixture of Fabercastell polychromos and Caran Luminance. And then the last one so that should ensure that we get those really neat kind of sharp edges. So I've actually got a few different colours for this tutorial specifically, quite a lot of like new greens that I've never used before and a few different yellows and stuff like that, which is perfect for the colours that we want to achieve in the eye. So if I make a start then just straight away with the eye and worry about the fur a little bit later on, you want to start by picking out the lightest colour that you can see in the reference photo, which is actually like a pale yellowy colour. So we want to use that as the base layer for the entirety of the iris. So I've picked out the Naples ochre, which is like a pale yellowy colour, so I'm going to use this with a light to medium pressure in small circular motions. I have gone in with quite a blunt pencil as well. I find that if you use a blunter surface, it's got a bit of a wider surface area, meaning that you can, you know, cover the area a lot quicker, you can shade in a lot quicker, and it just gives you that even coverage as well. So I'm drawing or shading around obviously the pupil in the middle and some of those light reflections as well. Some of the shapes in the eye, I find with cat eyes especially, the shapes kind of go all the way around like that, like the pupil is like the centerpiece and it almost like the hand of a clock goes all the way around. So if you follow along those shapes in that sort of direction all the way along, kind of going into the middle, you can kind of start building up those details in the eye just by mapping out the direction. I think Luminance pencils as well, they're really good as base layers because they're a much softer pencil than polychromos. They're predominantly wax based, which means that they're definitely a softer pencil. They're very kind of creamy to work on top of, and they're brilliant to use like midway through your drawing as well, for kind of like blending and just merging colours together. So once you've filled in that entire area, you want to go in with a really kind of bright green so we can get those like vibrant undertones coming through from underneath as we continue to add layers on top. So I'm actually going to use the shade May Green. This is one of the ones that I've never used before, and it's polychromo. So in my kind of initial outlines, I don't know if you can see on here because they have been kind of covered up a little bit, but I can kind of see just a really faint line here and there of like those shapes that make up the iris, where they're a little bit darker and there's those, you know, different formations going on in the eye. So you want to kind of follow some of those along, and if you work from like the outer edge of the eye, and again just kind of work your way towards the centre, it'll give that more kind of spherical feel to the eye, so it won't look as flat. You want to apply the hardest pressure on the outside, like outer edge of the eye, and release your pressure as you get closer to the middle. And obviously press harder where we can see these formations in the eye that are a little bit darker. So you can see that I'm following it round and just kind of gradually changing the direction of my pencil as I make my way around that pupil in the middle. The next colour that I'm going to layer on top is the shade Earth Green. This is a little bit more subtle, it's not quite as vibrant as what we've added so far. And again, you want to kind of do the same thing, just, you know, start from those outer edges of the eye and bring that colour in, releasing your pressure as you get more towards the centre. And just constantly doing like back and forth motions so it merges with that pigment underneath. So it's a little bit kind of darker, like right around the pupil. So using the bluntest part of the tip, I'm just doing like back and forth motions just to create that kind of like clockwork effect, if you will, as in all the lines are kind of coming from the centre of the eye all the way out, like all the way around. And you can also go over some of these like shape formations as well that are also pointing towards the pupil, just to make them a little bit darker in some places. So I'm just adding it anywhere else where I can see like little patches of this particular colour. I'm just going over the same area a couple of times to darken that pigment. I think cat eyes in general are quite interesting to draw because obviously the pupil dilates and goes really big or really small depending on whether it's like outside or in like a dark room or something. So when the pupil is quite small, we can see all of this lovely colour in the iris and kind of like see all the different colours that make up the iris and how they're formed and stuff like that. So I quite like drawing cat's eyes really. And they're always really like vibrant as well, like bright green or like brown. Like that. So already it's starting to look like more true to the reference photo in terms of the colour. We just want to add a little bit more depth now. So I'm going to go in with the shade Green Gold to bring out more of those yellowy tones in the iris. And anywhere where I can see that kind of dark golden tone, you want to very, very lightly just do small circular motions in that particular area. This is a very, very pigmented colour as well, so you don't need to apply a hard pressure at all. Keep it really light so you're in kind of control of the pigment, if you will. Just to make sure you don't add too much. So at this point I'm going to use the shade Black, making sure it's quite sharp, and I'm just going to outline the area that we've kind of worked on so far. So like the outside of the iris, like the eyeball, all the way around. You want to follow along those initial outlines. You want to keep your pressure really, really light and just kind of do small little lines all the way along that you just join in together so you can make that shape kind of more accurate. And then I'm going to fill in the iris in the middle. You want to kind of start off with a fairly light pressure just to map out that particular area, just so you're getting the shape right, and then you can kind of go over it a couple of times with a much harder pressure. And you want to really squash down the tooth of the paper so there's not any of that grainy texture showing through from underneath. We want it to be completely smooth and just really, really jet black, so we've got that contrast. And also avoid those light reflections as well, those highlights in the eye. So once you're happy with the shape of the outside of the eye, you can go over that line just to make it a little bit more prominent, a bit more defined. And then what I'm going to do whilst I've still got the black in my hand is start to fill out that little bit above the eye and below the eye, and the waterline and the sort of tear duct on the inner corner as well. Just like we did with the outside shape, you can do the same thing here. Just kind of follow along some of these initial outlines. And then you can start to fill in that area. You want to keep your pressure quite light again until you're like confident with the shapes and like where you've put all your lines and everything. Just start to map out the kind of outer part of the eye, if you will. So I've left a little bit showing here, which is going to be a little bit of the light reflection. And then it does start to merge off into the fur, so I'm just very lightly just kind of sketching in the direction of the fur and where it starts to like merge together. I've also left a little gap here, which is also going to be the light reflection, kind of in the water line. So once I'm happy with everything, I can start going over the same areas, but with a much harder pressure. And if you want something to be really, really dark, like we wanted the pupil, just keep going over the same area a couple of times and apply a hard pressure to squash down the tooth of the paper. Because at the minute we can see that grain coming up from underneath. Directly around the iris, it's quite a dark line. and then there's a lighter line, and then it goes back to being dark again. And it's all about really how the lighting is hitting it, and there's obviously going to be parts of the eye that are like this rather than flat. So there's going to be, the lighting's going to kind of hit it where it's highest, if that makes sense. So all the way around, there's going to be little bits of highlight everywhere, especially this bit here. I'm just trying to leave a gap where that's going to be. And then again, this also merges into the fur, but it kind of goes lighter underneath before it goes back into the dark fur. So I'm firstly just mapping out the direction. It kind of sweeps up. So you can see how I'm just gradually merging that with the fur, especially at the top. But I'm just using the bluntest part of my tip. It's got a much softer, thicker line, which you can use initially before we kind of tighten everything with those details more towards the end. So you want to also look how thick this darker kind of section is, this darker arch is, below this bit of highlight here. And it's much thicker than the highlight, so we want to just bring that down slightly, make this section a bit thicker all the way along. Still following along the direction that the hairs are going in. So in these areas of highlight that we've left, especially these bits just here, I'm going to go in with the shade Silver Grey, which is a Luminance pencil. This has a slight blue tint to it, so it's perfect when you're drawing like black fur or white fur, and especially light reflections in eyes. It's one of those perfect colours to have. So I'm just going to use this literally in the gap that we've left and kind of elongate it a little bit so it merges with that dark pigment that we've added. So it looks like it's emerging from that area and being hit by the light in the centre rather than being like two separate sections, if that makes sense. So I'm going to do the same to the bottom area. And there's also like a bit of a gap and then another more subtle light reflection underneath that, which then leads us onto this part here all the way down. So you can see how well that's just blending with that surrounding pigment. That's why Luminance pencils are just really good to use with polychromos. They're just really good for blending and just mixing pigments together. They kind of smudge those pigments underneath like effortlessly, just because they're a soft pencil. So I'm also just going to fill in this little bit here in the inner corner. Now if you make it too light, don't worry, because we are going to darken it again. The main thing is we want it to be smooth and kind of merging with the black around it. I'm also going to fill in this part here. So I'm filling in this little bit here in the fur and bringing that down. And this is where you really want to kind of follow along the direction of the fur. Again, following along these initial outlines. And I'm basically shading in the lightest areas in the fur that I can see. This is a perfect colour to use as a base layer when you're drawing black fur in particular. Because like I say, it has got that slight blue tint to it, which black fur often has. And if you look at the lightest colour that we can see in the black fur, it's definitely like a pale blue colour. So this is the perfect one to use. And again, being a base layer, it'll give us that really nice like creamy surface to work on top of. So that fur is going to look really soft and smooth at the end. So I've worn down this side of the pencil, and that's the side that I'm going to keep working on to get that really soft line and that even coverage. Unlike in the iris, we can start shading our as our base layer by doing back and forth motions, whereas in the eye we did more kind of circular motions. But with fur we can start to really build up that kind of back and forth linear texture from this very initial stage. Now this bit just underneath the eye, where it goes a little bit lighter before going back into the dark fur, I'm again just going to use this colour all the way along and merge it, almost like smudge this black pigment into the area that I'm going to be drawing. Like that, and then we can kind of do the same for the top as well. Just kind of keep going from where we left off with some of that really rough sketchy fur, and just bring that up to all the light parts that we can see in the reference photo. And I'm applying like a light to medium pressure. So for the darkest parts of the fur, I'm going to use the shade Cold Grey 2 as the base layer. This is slightly darker. And again, you want to kind of use it on its side so you're getting that really flat surface to give you a soft line. Polychromos do still work really well as base layers. I just prefer luminance layers, especially when you know, it's a pale luminance layer that you're adding. But polychromos do just work fine as well. They're a much harder pencil though because they're predominantly oil based. But for like really vibrant colours like the inside of the eye, you know, those colours are perfect for making it look really like rich and vibrant. So I'm following along this fur and like drawing into that silver grey colour that we've already added. Again, just so it merges all together. I think a tip for achieving like soft, silky looking fur, even from this very initial stage, you want to kind of shade like doing these back and forth motions, but at the end of each of your lines, you want them to almost like fade off into the page. So you never want to be able to see the start or the end of a line, if that makes sense. Until obviously we get to those like final details where we want to tighten everything up. But as we're building up like the tonal value, you just want to keep everything looking quite soft. So I'm just going to add this underneath the eye So it's quite dark here, then we've got that silver grey layer where it's lighter, and then I've left a tiny little bit of a gap where we're going to add this cold grey too, which is going to map out this slightly darker area where the fur kind of starts underneath the eye. And you kind of want to flick with your lines. That's how I achieve that kind of soft end to each of my lines. If you want to flick and release your pressure right at the end, and just, you know, back and forth, so it looks like it's emerging from that area but also kind of going into that area as well. So something like that, we can see that quite subtle shadow now. So we've added like the initial, like the very initial layer to the fur, so it's all kind of mapped out. So I'm just going to go back to the iris to keep building up those really nice, like vibrant, rich, greeny, yellowy colours. And the next colour that I'm going to go in with is the shade Olive Brown 50%, which is another Luminance pencil. And you want to pick out, basically, I think everywhere where we added that green gold colour, so where there's that really subtle like yellow tints going on, I'm just very lightly going to apply this pigment into those areas. And again, you can kind of define some of these shape formations that kind of make up part of the iris as well. Basically made up of loads of subtle shapes and lines and like different colours and squiggles here and there, and it's just all about picking them out and kind of breaking them down into those like larger shapes and then adding those smaller shapes of detail at the end. Just going to add a little bit to the top right hand corner, kind of fade that off as I get down by releasing my pressure. I'm just going to bring back some of that May green that we used right at the start. I'm just going to bring back this in the lightest parts of the eye. With each layer that we add, we're kind of squashing down the teeth of the paper as well. So we're going to end up with a really smooth, kind of glossy, like glass looking eye, which is what we want. And then next I'm going to go in with the shade Sky Blue. Now there's not much blue in here at all, but I can see a really subtle tint on the left hand side, kind of in the centre next to the pupil, just underneath this light reflection. So I'm just going to add, with a light pressure, a little bit of blue. And because we've got all these like yellowy greeny tones that we're drawing on top of, it won't actually transfer on as blue as it might look on the pencil. It'll kind of mix together with those pigments underneath and form like more of a turquoisey colour. Just going to add a little bit to the top as well, like right around this light reflection. Just anywhere else in the eye where you want that like turquoisey, bluey colour. I think the more that you look at the reference photo, the more these like subtle colours kind of jump out at you. And they're really important to include because that's what makes it look, you know, realistic. So there's probably a lot more of this colour included in the eye than I initially thought, because when layered over these lovely colours, it's kind of the perfect turquoisey colour that we're looking for. So I'm just adding it to the majority of the right hand side of the eye. So next I'm going to use the shade Olive Green. Now this is actually a Derwent artist pencil. I don't actually have many of these left anymore, but this is one of them that's perfect for like green eyes like this. I'm sure they come in a set. I'm not sure if you can get them individually anymore, but if you have a colour that's like an olive greeny sort of colour, that's literally perfect. That's just what we want. And again, I'm just going to add basically another layer, just to keep building up these greens and these like turquoisey colours. You want to apply like a medium pressure at this point as well. Keep defining some of the like shapes in the iris. And then I'm going to go in with the earth green that we used quite early on, which is that more subtle kind of green, just to continue to just blend and build up the colours in the iris. We keep building up these details as well, these kind of little squiggles of colour. So you want to go in with a slightly darker green now. So I'm going to use the shade Raw Umber, which is a Luminance pencil. And it's quite like a dark, earthy green, like a muddy green almost. So it's got that slight brown tint to it, which is perfect for like the darker details, especially around these kind of shape formations here. So I'm keeping my pressure fairly light until I know that, you know, I'm happy with where I'm kind of putting that pigment, and then you can apply a slightly harder pressure, but you don't want it to be too kind of overpowering. Keep it, you know, fairly subtle, but keep building up those shadows at the same time. So we've added those like darker shadows, but it's also looking quite brown now. So just to bring back those kind of turquoisey colours back up to the surface, I'm going to go back in with that sky blue and go over like everywhere where we added that blue before. Just going to add a little bit to this area of highlight in the waterline, just while I've got this colour in my hand, just to make it a little bit more blue. And at the top here as well. So to add depth to the eye, we want to darken those shadows at the top, like on the top edge here, so it looks like it's kind of emerging from like the socket, if you will. So I'm going to go in with the olive green yellowish and just start with a hard pressure, kind of working from that top edge and just bringing it down slightly. Like that, and then just add a few more extra details while we've got this colour in our hand. And then I'm going to use the dark sepia, which is like the darkest of the brown shades. Just to basically do the same thing, but this should really, really darken it now and create more of that depth. So I'm applying the hardest pressure on the edge and then releasing my pressure as I approach like the centre of the eye going down. Just going to add a little bit to the inner corner edge as well. And then to kind of darken that even further, you can go in with a black, but kind of fade that off a little bit sooner, so we're not covering up all that lovely colour that we've built up so far. And then I'm going to darken this little bit of highlight here, just kind of bring it in slightly, because at the minute it's a little bit too wide. And I'm also going to define the bottom edge of the eye. And the inner corner. And just kind of dull down this highlighted bit here. So if you ever want to dull down highlights, you can just go over it with a black, say, with a light pressure, and it'll just dull it down, but we'll still be able to see that highlight from kind of underneath. So I'm now going to focus on the highlights in the eye and just really kind of pull them out. But before I do that, I'm just going to go in with the black to define the pupil just a little bit more along the edges, because it's kind of got a little bit misshapen with all the colours that we've kind of added around it. It's smudged some of those edges a little bit. So just to define that and, you know, darken it even more, just going over it again with a hard pressure, making sure those edges are really defined and it looks really smooth. So then for the highlights, I've picked out the Buff Titanium Luminance pencil, which is a really, really pale yellowy colour, almost like a creamy colour, like an off-white sort of colour, probably the same as this masking tape actually in comparison with the white paper. So what I'm going to do is kind of fill in these gaps that we've left, which are the kind of light reflections in the eye. So there's kind of this square here, and then the bit attached to it on the right is a lot darker. But while I've still got this Buff Titanium in my hand, I'm just going to pull out some of the highlights in these like subtle shapes in the iris. Like that. And then for that little section on the right hand side of that highlight, I'm going to go in with the French grey 30%. This is like a mousy kind of brown grey kind of colour, fairly neutral. And I'm just going to fill in this area. I'm going to start off light, but then you want to go over it a couple of times to cover up the grain of the paper, just to keep it quite smooth. A little bit at the top. And then I'm going to go in with the black again, just to widen this pupil slightly. Because if you look at the highlight, it only goes like towards the right hand side edge of the pupil. It doesn't kind of go over that. So just going to make sure that I've got the shape spot on. I think with fur you don't have to necessarily be as accurate, but with eyes especially, you want to kind of really pay attention to those subtle shapes. It's kind of the difference between making it look like really realistic and just like a flat kind of eye. And obviously we're aiming for realism. And then this little bit that I've just missed, I'm just going to use the olive brown just to fill that in. So you can leave it like that, or if you're a perfectionist like I am and spend about 10 years doing one little tiny thing, you can go in with the dark sepia, making sure it's really, really like pinpoint sharp. And on the right hand side of this square, I'm just going to slightly darken it. And I mean slightly, like literally, I'm not even applying a light pressure, I'm just letting it glide across the paper. Just like that. And a little bit at the top as well. And then we've got Buff Titanium, just a tiny little like dot almost in that area of highlight where it's kind of, you know, coming in front of the pupil. So to make those highlights really kind of pop, especially this one on the left, I'm just going to use the fine nib Uniball Posca pen in white. So it's basically like a paint pen. If I just do a little bit on my finger, it's wet, and you can literally, you know, smudge it away with your finger, or like dab it off if it's still not dry, if you end up adding too much. But I just like to use it just to kind of dot in those really bright white specks of highlight in like eyes or tongues, or even parts of the fur, especially whiskers. Actually, they're good for whiskers. And maybe just a little tiny little bit in the centre there. And then on the bottom left, kind of in the waterline, there's a little speck, so I'm just going to draw that in. Just literally dot in that highlight. And then this little bit along the waterline, be really accurate and sort of delicate with where you put in these little specks. So I've just done a few there, and then with a really sharp pencil, any will do, just like a pale, really sharp one. You just want to lightly go over them and just kind of smudge them together. So we've got that really fine detail. So now that we've finished the actual eye, I'm going to start focusing more on the surrounding black fur. So with black fur in general, I'd say there's always subtle blue tones in there, and I'd say there's always like lilacs or dark browns in there as well. Basically white or black fur, because they're very sort of monochrome, there's always a lot of subtle colours in there, and it's about kind of including them in a subtle way, which helps you to kind of capture the lighting that's like bouncing off the fur and kind of illuminating those colours in the fur, if that makes sense. Otherwise it would just look quite flat if we just went straight in with like just like cool greys and blacks like straight away. You need to kind of build up some of the colours as well. So I'm going to go in firstly with the slate grey. This is pretty much like a Payne's grey. It's quite a dark grey, and it's got a slight blue like metallic tint to it. So I'm going to start using this in all the darkest areas of the fur, and just like follow along the shading and the fur direction that we've got down so far. You want to apply a light to medium pressure and just keep using the bluntest part of the tip once you've worn it down a little bit. So you want to darken this area just underneath the eye, leaving that lighter kind of arched area just underneath where the light is kind of hitting it. And it'll kind of show that that little bit is raised kind of around the eye. So I'm just still shading, but I'm going over the areas that are, you know, slightly darker, that are the darkest of just this area of fur that we're drawing. You can see at the minute it's looking quite grainy because we've only added like 2 layers. So it's picking up all that tooth of the paper from underneath, which is absolutely fine at this point. We're just like literally mapping out where those areas of light and dark are in the fur. You can apply a slightly harder pressure as well if you want, especially to this part on the left, which is very much sort of jet black. It's very much in the shadows. So that fur does look really, really dark. So at this point it should look something like this, where we've sort of built up the tonal values. We can definitely see the areas of kind of shine and lighter parts in the fur, and we can definitely see the darker parts. And it should look quite grainy as well, but also smooth in terms of there's no real detail that we can see at the minute. It's just, we've just been kind of soft with our lines, so it's just built up the tonal value really. So the next thing that I'm going to do is include some of those really subtle kind of tints of colour in the fur. So if I just focus on the light fur for a minute, I know that we use the silver grey Luminance pencil as the very first base layer for the fur. So I'm actually going to go back in with that colour and just work into the lighter parts of the fur, kind of merging it with that surrounding pigment, so it all merges together nicely and it all looks really kind of soft and silky. You can literally see that pigment underneath just moving around as well. That's the beauty of using Luminance pencils, because they're so soft, they literally just smudge together the colours underneath. So it's just helping us to blend really. You can see already the difference between that grainy texture and the smoother texture. So just constant back and forth motions, just kind of smudging and dragging that pigment around, you know, really blending it together. So we should have really kind of smoother, lighter sections in the fur now. And then sticking to the lighter parts in the fur, I'm actually going to go in with the light cobalt blue. This is obviously a much more saturated blue, and I'm just going to use it quite lightly, keeping it quite subtle, but just in any areas in the light fur that kind of jump out at me as being a little bit more kind of blue than the rest of it. It won't actually transfer on your drawing as blue as you might think it looks on like the outside of the pencil, because these kind of pale colours that we've added underneath will desaturate the colour slightly. So it's just going to act as like an undertone really, just to kind of tint the black fur from like underneath as we continue to add more layers. I think at this stage as well you can afford to be quite sketchy with it still. You can see that I am being quite messy. I'm not being really like precise with where I'm putting every single pencil stroke. As long as you're kind of heading in the same direction as the fur and you're continually doing these back and forth motions, it gives us a chance to kind of build up the tonal values first, and then we can go in and tighten everything up and add in those like really intricate details more towards the end. I think a lot of artists like to just go straight in with the details, but you know, the problem with that is that it can end up looking quite flat, and we want to have, you know, as much depth as we can in our drawing to make it look as realistic as we can. And this is like one of the key stages, just, you know, being patient and spending time building up the subtle colours and the tonal value really. So once you've done that and we've added that really subtle blue tint to the lighter parts of the fur, we then want to go back in with the darker parts of the fur, and I'm going to actually use another blue shade. This is the dark indigo. This is actually the darkest blue shade of the polychromo range, so it's really, really deep dark blue basically. So I'm going to use this where we've added that slate grey, so in the darkest areas of the fur. I'm just applying a light to medium pressure and just following along that fur direction. So all the fur now is looking quite blue, which is what we want because it's going to act as that really nice kind of subtle undertone for the darker colours that we're about to now add on top. So I'm going to go in with the Payne's Grey Polychromo and again start working into the darkest parts of the fur, and you can also start building up some of those details now by kind of elongating some of those lines, flicking them into the lighter parts of the fur, kind of leaving gaps in between so we can still see, you know, that pale colour underneath. So I'm applying a medium to hard pressure. It's at this stage where your hand will probably start to ache quite a lot because we're kind of squashing down the tooth of the paper, reducing the grainy texture. And we're just wanting to fill in all these tiny little gaps so the fur looks as smooth as possible. So you've got to really work it into the paper. So you can see gradually in some areas it is getting much smoother. When it comes to the details that you're drawing in where the lighter parts of the fur are, you may want to just rotate your pencil slightly so you're using the kind of sharpest point of the tip and not the bluntest part. Bluntest part's for shading really, and the sharpest part is for those like finer hair details that you want to add in. So obviously the fur is kind of starting from around the eye and flowing in this sort of direction. So when you're drawing these shadows, I find that if you kind of flick up into the lighter fur, leaving gaps in between, those gaps in between are kind of still going into the darker parts of the fur, so it kind of looks like it is flowing in that direction and that this fur is kind of above this fur in a way. I don't know, a bit difficult to explain, but if you just kind of flick in the direction that the fur is kind of coming from, it just smooths the fur out and just kind of flows a little bit better, I think. Like that dark fur is emerging from underneath this kind of shiny fur where the light's hitting it. So if you want to go back and darken these lighter sections in the fur, because at the minute there's probably a little bit too much of a contrast and we just want to tone it down slightly, you can go in with a warm grey 3 or a warm grey 4. I've just gone in with quite a blunt pencil just to kind of, again, just smudge across those pigments, so it's all looking smooth and it's all going in the same sort of direction and flowing nicely. And it'll just tone it down a little bit. So at this point you want to apply, you know, quite a hard pressure, really work the paper, really smudge everything together. So before I go in with the black, I'm just going to briefly use the dark sepia, just to add some really subtle kind of dark brown tints to areas of the fur. Now if you look at the reference photo, it's not obvious that there are kind of little bits of brown tints here and there, but even so I like to just include them because I think it helps the fur look a lot more realistic, having subtle colours going on, especially with it being black fur, and because, you know, the majority of it is literally pitch black, especially on the left hand side. It really is jet black, we can't really see many details at all. So kind of emerging from that darkness, we just want to include some like subtle but still dark colours like the dark sepia, just so that fur looks like it's got a little bit more depth, and you know, the lighting is kind of pulling out some of those you know, more subtle colours like the browns and the blues and the lilacs. So if you notice, I'm adding this colour kind of like on the edge of the shadows as it emerges into the lighter parts of the fur, just so we can still see it after we've added the black to the darker parts. Just kind of closing the gap a little bit of this light section of fur, kind of joining together some of these lines. you want to keep building up these details as well. You know, elongate some of these lines and just keep kind of merging everything together, back and forth motions, and just be patient with it. And with every layer that we're adding, you can see how much it's smoothing out as well. So that fur at the end will really look kind of smooth and sleek and shiny in those lightest areas. So something like that, we can see a really subtle brown tint along some of the edges of those shadows kind of emerging into the lighter parts. So just as another extra little subtle tint of colour, I'm going to go in with the sepia 10% in the lighter parts of the fur. This is quite a neutral grey tone, but it also has that really subtle lilac-y tint to it. So again, I'm just going to, you know, work into some of these lines that we've kind of left a bit brighter. And it should start building up that subtle kind of lilac-y purple tone. And the good thing with Luminance pencils is that, you know, you can draw over really dark multiple layers of pigment and it'll still show up quite well as long as you apply, you know, a fairly hard pressure. So at this point, this is when I'm going to start using the black to really darken those, you know, darker shadows, get that really jet black colour in there. You want to apply a really hard pressure to squash down the tooth of the paper just to eliminate the rest of that grain so everything looks really, really smooth. So you may need to go over the same areas a couple of times and just keep, you know, working that paper. So I'm just toning down this bit of highlight above the eye where it kind of starts to merge into the fur. It's kind of a little bit textured and bumpy like this little bit here. So I'm just doing some like random squiggles over the top of the highlight, like A to tone it down and B just to kind of create that texture. remember to kind of flick back up into this lighter fur, leaving the little gaps in between. They represent the individual like tufts of fur that are kind of going in that sort of direction. So you want to kind of work in and around these like lighter little bits of fur that we've left throughout our drawing so far. Just kind of work around them. So directly underneath the eye here, where it meets this lighter kind of arch, I'm just going to bring that down slightly and just make it a little bit more kind of textured and detailed and more kind of bumpy, because the like much shorter hairs directly around the eye. I'm just briefly going to use the French Grey 30%, which is again like a fairly neutral grey colour, but it's got a slight brown tint to it. I'm just going to use that in this area here directly under the eye, just with a like light to medium pressure, just to kind of tone down that blue just a little bit. Like that, and then back in with the black. I think I'm just going to give it a quick sharpen, because you do want quite a sharp pinpoint sharp pencil for the details. I always use now the Swordfish Icon sharpener. Looks like this, and it's got like, you put your pencil in there and you can kind of wind it, and it stops kind of winding once it's completely sharp. I did used to use the Jacquard electric pencil sharpener. Again, that's really, really good. But if you want a really sharp pencil, I would recommend the Swordfish Icon sharpener. And it also fits the Luminance pencils, whereas the Jacquard electric pencil sharpener doesn't really. It mainly works for polychromos and Pablo pencils. I'm going to start working into, you know, these lighter bits of fur. Start drawing in the finer details. So I'm just constantly working around the lighter tufts of fur, those kind of lighter individual hairs. I'm trying to make them a little bit shorter as well, because the fur, especially like directly around the eye, is a lot shorter than the rest of the fur. So it should be looking jet black in those darkest areas now. And those individual lighter tufts should look a little bit more defined, and you know, it should start to look a little bit more realistic now. So the final step that I'm going to do is to use the craft knife slice tool. So the craft knife slice tool is basically like, this is what it looks like. It's like a metallic pen, you can hold it like a pen, and it's basically got a ceramic blade on the end of it. It's got a curved edge and it's got a little pointy edge, and basically the idea is you can use the kind of removal method to remove those top layers of pigment and almost like draw back in those highlights. So you can literally pull out the highlights in the fur, and it just gives you that extra little bit of detail that would be like quite difficult to achieve just by using the colour pencils alone. I'm not applying a hard pressure at all. This works best once you've added, you know, a number of layers, so it's got those layers to remove, which we've done. So it should work quite well, and it does work really well on the Fabriano paper as well. Even like little specks or little textures where you just want to kind of brighten up areas, it's literally perfect for that. You know, and you can keep building up these lighter tufts as well. So I'm literally just brushing it across the surface, creating some really like subtle highlights in those shadows and kind of really brightening up some of these like lighter tufts where the light is hitting it and making that fur a lot brighter. This tool is perfect for like whiskers or even little highlights in the eyes as well. You can use it to kind of scrape away little squiggly details, or for the light reflections and like the highlights in the waterline as well. So like I did for the highlights in the eyes, I'm just going to go in with the white Uniball Posca pen again, and just this little bit underneath the eye that's kind of a little bit raised, I'm just going to start add in some dots where those like specks of highlights are, and then just dab it with my finger so it just kind of smudges them and makes them a bit more subtle. Like that. And as the final step, you can always go back in with any of your like more vibrant colours that we've used, like some of the blues. So if I just go in with the shade light cobalt blue again, and just work into some of those highlights. Now that we've kind of scraped away some of the pigment in some areas with that craft knife slice tool, you can then kind of work back into it. Just to make some of them a little bit more blue and just bring back some of that colour. If you want to make any lines slightly thicker, you can go in with the silver grey and just, again, just kind of work back into what you've scraped away. Apply a hard pressure and just follow that line along. Just to brighten it up even more, really. Pale coloured pencils or white pencils, or just going back to what you used as your base layer colour, they're good for if you're wanting to add like subtle details in and amongst like the shadowy areas. But I definitely recommend the craft knife slice tool for like your brightest details like this. You can literally use the point to get really fine lines, which is perfect, especially when you're working on like a small scale piece and it's hard to get that really fine detail. That'll really help you. So the final part, I'm just going to take this masking tape off. Some might say this is the best part. Just so we've got that really nice crisp edge. I really hope you enjoyed this Halloween themed focus tutorial. If you've drawn this, then please tag me in your drawings on social media so I can see them. Please remember to subscribe to my channel to see more and like the video if you enjoyed it. If you're interested in more tutorials just like this, then head over to my Patreon channel. I've left the link in the video description below. And yeah, hope you all have a lovely Halloween.